Hey everyone, welcome to Rock Bottom Syndicate. I'm your host, Joyce Strong. Rock Bottom is about people who have a story to tell to inspire others to keep working toward their potential no matter what happens. Rock Bottom is an opportunity to learn, pivot, and adapt to whatever life throws your way. Rock Bottom is a time where you can choose to take responsibility for everything in your life, because when you take responsibility, you gain control to change things for yourself. Your secret to the prison of your emotions. Telling your story will set you free to be yourself, to heal and grow as a person, and move on to enjoy the journey of creating a strong, joyous life. So ask for help and tell your story. My guest today is Jack Beavers, and he is from Redemption Warrior Speaking, and he is out of Atlanta, Georgia, and he is going to tell us his story on his redemption and his life challenges in rock bottom and what he has been able to do to overcome. He's a Christian motivational speaker and a straight shooter. He's been in the Marine Corps and in the Army, and had tours in Afghanistan and Somalia, and he'll tell you all about his story in our episode today. So reach out to me, Joyce Strong, on Rock Bottom Syndicate. Reach out to Jack Beavers. You can get him at his email address, which is in the show notes, and also on LinkedIn, where you can find him. Hi, Jack. Thanks for coming on the Rock Bottom Syndicate. It's really nice to have you here today. And for my guest, this is Jack Beavers, and he is a Christian motivational speaker from Redemption Warrior Speaking, and he's going to share his story with us on his rock bottoms and how he's been able to convert those to positive life experiences and personal growth. So welcome, Jack.
Thank you, Joyce. And, it's an honor and a privilege to be on your syndicate today. I was excited about it, and I'm pumped, and I'm ready to go. I'm ready to get my story out there in hopes that it'll help somebody and give somebody hope and renew their perspective on life and give them a different mindset where they know that there's no valley that they can't overcome and climb to the top of the mountain.
Well, I've heard a little bit. You and I met on LinkedIn, and I've heard bits of your story, and heard you do some live videos, and so I have a good flavor from what you've told so far. So I'm looking forward to getting the pieces filled in and hear. You have a unique voice, very inspiring, to say the least.
Thank you. It's I've always, for the last 2 years, I wanted to be a Christian motivational speaker. Wanted to go out there and enrich other people's lives and bring the hurting to out of the mud and get them to where they know that, with God and with the right type of traits and the right type of mindset, that they can thrive and be successful and live a happy, successful life.
Mm-hmm. So what happened in your life that got you thinking you should be a motivational speaker?
Well, at the tender age of 8 years old, my mother told me that the whole entire family thought that I was going to end up being a pastor for a living. And the reason why they thought that is because she told me that from the time I was 8 years old all the way up till I was 13, that I would go sit in my father's work truck with a Bible, and that I would literally sit in that truck and write sermons. And my mother saved all those sermons from all the ones that I had written at that young of a tender age. And I told my mom and dad and everybody that would listen, as soon as I hit the age of 12, I started telling them that I was going to go to Oral Roberts University, graduate from Oral Roberts University, and become a pastor for a living. But unfortunately, even though I believe that was my calling, it never came to fruition. I never went that route. Life took me in other revenue and in other ways, in other roads, and it was because I was too young to understand the true meaning of a calling from God, and I was a little crazy little teenage sinner, and I lost my ways for a while. So I ended up not becoming a pastor for a living. So through all the hell and trials and tribulation that I had throughout the rest of my journey, I'm 50 years old now, and I don't think there's been, an age that I didn't go through some sort of hard time or some sort of storm. And so, now that I'm older, I feel like, I need it, since I didn't adhere to God's calling at a tender age, that I needed to use the blessings and what God has given me even to this day, to utilize that to help other people. So that's why I wanted to become a Christian motivational speaker.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me when people come upon a career that it's not something that you trained specifically for, and you've taken all these detours. So you couldn't, if somebody said to you, "Hey, Jack, I want to be a motivational speaker. How do I do it?" If you connected the dots backward, they would have to go through some pretty scenic routes to get there.
They would.
Yeah.
Life is a teacher.
Yeah.
And it has many lessons to be taught and many lessons to be learned.
So you went into the Marine Corps at a pretty young age. Is that
I
correct?
did, unfortunately. When I hit the age of 16, I was a junior in high school. And like I said, I had plans to go to Oral Roberts University, but that quickly changed. When I turned 16, I started working out in the local gym up the street from my home. Got real involved in the gym to the point where I was doing steroids.
Mm.
Ended up competing in Mr. Georgia Teenage in 1986 and took third place in Mr. Georgia Teenage because I was juicing it for so long, and I quit doing the juice in order to pass the drug test for the competition. But the receptionist at the gym was a young lady that was my age, and we fell in love, started dating. And her brother, who she really looked up to, was in the Marine Corps, or had been in the Marine Corps. He had already gotten out.
Mm-hmm.
So she said, Jack, not only do I love you and want to marry you, but there's one thing that I need you to do in order for us to tie the knot. I need you to join the Marine Corps so I can have my dream of having a big, huge Marine Corps wedding and making my brother proud.
Mm.
So that's where the trajectory of my life changed, because I chose love over God's calling.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to the Marine Corps, got out of boot camp. And after I got out of boot camp, we had a huge Marine Corps wedding, the whole 9 yards. I had, drill instructors and color guard at my wedding.
Mm-hmm.
And the color guard drew swords as we was leaving the church, and we walked up underneath the swords, and it was a big to do. It was a grand wedding that both her parents and my parents spent a lot of money putting together.
Mm-hmm.
But she got her dream. So that's where my life changed as far as my spiritual life and my life with God, because once I got into the Marine Corps, that's when I went from being a man of God to being a man of the flesh. And it took many years later before I came back to the roots of where I belong.
It really sounds like you not only abandoned God, but abandoned who you were. You detached from who your true self was then.
Joyce, that's a great point, because you hit the nail on the head. And I didn't realize that at the time that I was doing that. But you're 100% correct, man. I lost my identity to try to fulfill an identity for somebody else.
Yeah.
And we don't realize, unfortunately, whether at a young age or an older age, how codependent can be dangerous, being codependent, or allowing somebody else to influence you in such a strong manner that you lose your identity. and you live an identity that you don't even know or wouldn't normally live, because the first adversity that I went through is this little girl that I married had never been away from her brother and never had been away from her mom and dad. I mean, she was living with her parents when I married her. So when we got married, I drug her 2 states away to North Carolina, got stationed at Cherry Point, North Carolina. And that's the first time she's ever left home. That's the first time she's ever been away from mommy and daddy. That was the first time she'd ever been away from family. And she couldn't handle it. So 6 months in, she packed bags and went back home to mommy and daddy again. You know, and that led to a divorce. She didn't leave because of something I was doing, and she didn't leave because our marriage had hit rock bottom. She left because she just didn't know how to adapt to her new lifestyle of being an adult, being on her own, and realizing that she had made a commitment to cut the umbilical cord and be an adult and live on her own. So shortly after that, you know, there was a, you know, in the military, unfortunately, in the Marine Corps, we like to party. That's how guys, you know, run things. It's like a fraternity house. We we curse a lot, we drink a lot, we party a lot, we chase a lot of women. And we were having a party one night, and I was still reeling and hurting from my wife bailing and packing bags and leaving and going home. And so at that party, I overdosed on tequila. I had taken an entire the biggest bottle of tequila you can buy at the liquor store. I drank that entire bottle in 2 swigs. Last thing I remember is finishing that bottle out, slamming it down on a table, and pumping my chest out to my fellow Marines and thinking I'm this big bad Marine Corps guy, you know, and that was the last thing I remember. I woke up in the hospital 2 days later.
Wow. Well, they saved your life. You know, what strikes me there is it's what I've heard people talk about who get, who are, maybe they're not thinking about suicide, or maybe they're thinking about suicide, but it's more they just want the pain to stop and they act impulsively.
That is correct, because I was, you know, I've never been a weak person to think about suicide, and that wasn't my motivation. That wasn't what I was thinking when I did that. And you're 100% correct. I was wanting the pain to go away for at least a night.
Yeah.
I was young. I didn't have the right perspective on life. I didn't have the right mindset. So I made a mistake and did something extremely stupid that it really seriously almost cost me my life. The doctors told me that, you know, had I not been in such great physical shape and as young as I was, that I probably would have never lived through that.
Yeah. Have you forgiven yourself for that episode?
Oh yeah, a long time ago. You know, when you're young and dumb, I mean, we've all been there.
Yeah.
You know, unfortunately, you just make some bad decisions and bad mistakes early on in life, and you know, sometimes you got to go down some bad roads to get on a road to glory.
Yeah.
And you know,
So that
like I said,
wasn't your last rock bottom, though, was it?
that was just the beginning. I've had 1,000 more since then.
Oh my God.
But I spent 5 years in the Marine Corps, and after that, and everything was great, man. I had a good life. I loved being in the Marines, but after doing one tour in Iraq and one tour in Somalia, I decided that I didn't want no more of it. You know, I didn't want to get my 20 and retire, because I was tired of going into combat and you know, living in fear like that. Because believe it or not, you know, when you go into combat, you really, it doesn't matter how bad of a badass you think you are. You're not so bad when you get put in a position like that, because you God honestly don't know if you're coming home day by day. I mean, so many of your comrades getting killed, and you just don't know if you're gonna make it home. So I did Somalia first. Then after Somalia, I went to Iraq, and after I got home from Iraq, I said that's enough. I'm done. So I got out of the Marine Corps, and I was still living in sin. Because in the Marine Corps, like I said, it's not a place that, at least it wasn't back in my time when I was in, but it wasn't a place where faith fit in. It wasn't a place where people spoke about faith. It wasn't a place where people spoke about God. So I was living in the flesh. But anyways, I got out of the Marine Corps, and then I couldn't fit into the civilian sector. Every job that I was getting terminated from because they said that I was too aggressive. I had too much of a Marine Corps mentality. I wanted the structure that could never fit in the business world. And then I had a hard time in the business world because all the employees, in my opinion at the time, they wasn't disciplined enough, and they didn't have the character and the traits that I was used to being around. Because even though we partied hard in the Marine Corps, we still lived our life by a certain code. We lived our life with integrity. We lived our life with ambition. We lived our life with motivation. We lived our life with discipline. And, when you were at work, you were at work. I mean, there was no half-assing anything, and there was no talking back to your superiors. And it was a regime, a strict regime that you don't find in the civilian sector. But one of my buddies of mine, after I got out of the Marines, he called me up one morning and said, "Hey, Jack, man, I want to celebrate your freedom. I'm gonna come get you, and we're gonna go celebrate." So he came and got me, and that's gonna start my next big, huge adversity and storm to overcome. Because that afternoon when he came and picked me up, Lord and forbid, he took me to a strip club. And when he took me to that strip club, a girl that was there as a stripper decided that she wanted to take a liking to me. So she took a liking to me, and we started dating, and I ended up marrying her. And when we got married, I went back that's when I went back into the military again. So the Marine Corps wasn't taking back prior service, so I had to go in the Army. So I went in the Army. Yeah, at that time they wasn't taking back prior service because at that time we wasn't involved in any combat missions, or Iraq was settled down after the first Gulf Desert Storm. It had settled down. And so they wasn't taking back prior service, so I had to go back into the Army. So I made a huge mistake by marrying a girl with that type of character and with that type of background, because she did drugs. I've never been a drug person ever in my life. Quite frankly, didn't even really know what drugs were at that time in my life. But she did drugs, and she wasn't of good moral, ethical value. But I made that bad decision to marry her anyway. So we go in the Army, and we get stationed up at Fort Hood, Texas. We ended up having our first child while we were in Fort Hood. We came back. I got out. I only signed a 2-year contract because I didn't know if I wanted to make it a career and stick with it and get my 20 this time. But that was my intent. But unfortunately, my wife, after we had our first child, she ended up having some mental issues. And so I had to get out on an honorable medical discharge due to my wife's medical problems that she was having with bipolar illness and some other things.
Mm.
And so I got out of the Marine Corps, and we come back home, and we have a second child, 2 daughters.
Mm-hmm.
And after that second child, man, she really fell into a lot of problems. Her bipolar was real bad. She wasn't taking medication for it. She was self-medicating. Then she ended up getting back in with all of her friends that she had when she was back in her stripper days. And when that happened, she started hitting drugs real hard. Started doing cocaine, started doing meth, started doing heroin.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave her an ultimatum that either she go and get into some rehabilitation, or I was going to have to, file for divorce and leave. She didn't want to do the rehab, and she liked doing the lifestyle that she was living. So I ended up leaving her and filing for divorce. Well, I fought for custody of my kids, my 2 daughters, because I didn't want them to be with a drug addict mom. But every turn I was making, I was losing in the judicial system. I couldn't convince them that she had a drug problem. I couldn't get them to order her to take drug tests. So I felt defeated, and I didn't want to leave my children behind in that environment. So I made up with her. And even though we went through the divorce, got completely divorced, because I didn't want my children to grow up with a mother like that, I wanted to, protect them. I got back together with her and got remarried.
Mm-hmm.
Not because I loved her, not because I wanted to be with her, but because I wanted to try to have my children flourish and succeed in life and not be brought up by a single mom that was a strung out drug addict.
Mm-hmm.
So that didn't work out. Even though I remarried her, I just couldn't live life like that. So I decided to divorce her again.
Mm-hmm.
So I divorced her again. And when I divorced her again, I went back and fought for custody of my kids, and never could win. It just seemed like it was a constant back-to-back defeat, where I couldn't just, for whatever reason, I couldn't get the judicial system to see it my way, and for them to figure out that she was a strung out drug addict.
Mm-hmm.
So when I divorced her, that's when I met my next wife, about, I guess, 2 years later. And that's when I got back back to my old roots of being a godly man, and living the Christian life and the godly life. And even after I married her, I was still fighting for custody of my other children. And that custody battle lasted for 15 years before my oldest daughter at the time was 15. Finally, the state, I don't know how, but they realized that she was a strung out drug addict. So the state took the kids away from her. And that's where my true hell began, right there. Because I was already remarried, had 2 other children from my new marriage, and God was just all in my life. I mean, it couldn't have been a better life. Then when the state took my 2 daughters away from my ex-wife, I thought, here's my chance. Here's my day. Finally, I'll get custody of my kids now. Well, my 15-year-old daughter, I didn't know it, but my ex-wife had started doing drugs with her at the tender age of 11.
Oh my.
So my daughter, had already, even though she was only 15, she had already been living the hard life from the age of 11 to the age of 15. And she was strung out on drugs herself. and she didn't want to come live with me. And she knew that, I was only literally 24 hours away from going to court and getting custody of them after a 15-year battle. Because I literally did not quit fighting for custody of my children for 15 years. So I was 24 hours away from going to court, and she didn't want me to have custody of her because she knew that I was strict. She knew that I had my military background, and she knew that I wasn't going to put up with stupidity. And I certainly wasn't going to put up with her doing drugs at that tender age.
Mm-hmm.
So she went and told the Department of Family and Children's Services that I had molested her in her past.
Mm.
And when that happened, defects in the state said, wait a minute, you're not getting custody now. And matter of fact, now we're going to charge you with deprivation, and we're going to bring you into the same problem that we brought your ex-wife into, where, now we're going to not charge you criminally, but we're going to charge you to where, you never get custody of those two kids again until they turn 18 and come find you. But, it is what they failed to realize is that, I had the favor and the blessings of God upon my life at that point in my life. So no devil, demon, or enemy could keep me down and kick me and keep me in that dark valley. So they investigated and dropped the investigation, but I had to sign a waiver that the state was able to keep my kids until they were 18 years of age. So I signed that waiver, and then me and my wife that I have now, we had three children years later. My three daughters that I have with my wife that I have now are 15, 14, and 7. And after that storm of not getting my kids like I thought I was going to, and for my own daughter, my own flesh and blood, to accuse me of something that could have put me in prison for the rest of my God-given life, of molesting her, I had to turn my back. So I haven't talked to my daughter since that day when I found out she made those allegations. But she's in prison now, so it wouldn't matter even if I wanted to have a relationship with her, I couldn't, because her ways that her mom taught her and the drug use that her mom did with her at such a tender age ruined her. So now she's behind bars, living a life of being an inmate in a prison in Tennessee. But anyways, me and my wife, we started going to this charismatic church, Pentecostal church.
Mm-hmm.
And, Pentecostals, we believe in hooping and hollering and laying hands on people and slaying people in the spirit and laying hands on them and prophesying over them. And, man, I mean, things were going strong. I was the leader of the intercessory prayer group. I was a youth minister at the church. And so, with living a godly life, I mean, it really turned my life around for the better. I was making more money at that time of my life than I ever made in my entire life. God was blessing me and favoring me every step of the way, every turn I made. I mean, he was just doubling the blessings. If I tied $100, I'd end up with $500 a week later, literally. I mean, I got to see the manifestation of God's work personally, front and center. And so then the enemy decides, your life's going too good. We can't allow that to happen. So it's time for me to strike again. So I got fired from my job and making, $125,000 a year after year. And me and my wife and kids had to move into my parents' basement. in their home because my wife didn't work and I was the breadwinner.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of living on the streets, we had to go live with my parents as two adults with two kids. That was demoralizing.
Mm-hmm.
It tore my self pride down. It tore my self worth down, to be a man in his 30s having to go and live with his mommy and daddy in their basement. So I had to pick myself up. I mean, I was in the valley at that point, and I had to pick myself up and get the right perspective and mindset, and realize that it was an attack from the enemy, and that everything was going to be good as soon as I make changes in my life and make changes with my perspective, and make changes with who I was at that point and what I needed to do to get back on my feet. So I got back on my feet. Me and my wife and kids moved back out of my mom and dad's home again. But then the enemy decides he wanted to strike again. And this is where I really decided to get into wanting to become a motivational speaker, because, I lived the hell of combat. I lived the hell of losing two wives, my first one and then my second one. Not only that, but I lost my two kids from my second wife. But me and my wife had moved out of my parents' house, and we were still going to church, living that godly life, tithing 10% every paycheck, just living the good life. And the enemy decided he was going to strike again. And so my wife decided that she wanted to separate. And I was devastated. And we went to we took the kids, even though our marriage was on the rocks, we took the kids to go roller skating one night. It was on a Friday night. And while we were roller skating, my wife never came into the roller skating rink for some reason. But I got the roller skates for me and my kids, and we went out on the floor and we were roller skating. About an hour later, I looked around and I didn't see my wife. So I checked the women's restroom, combed the place. She wasn't nowhere to be found. So I said, well, crap, she must have left. So I'm going to take the kids and go to my parents' house. So I grabbed all of our stuff, turned our skates in, walked outside. And when I walked outside, there was about 6 cop cars in the parking lot. As soon as I walked out I had one of my daughters in my arms, literally. One of them was walking beside me. And as soon as I walked out the front doors of that roller skating ring, every one of the police officers drew their weapons on me, and told me to put my daughter down. They came in and swooped my 2 daughters away from me, threw me on the ground, handcuffed me, and told me that my wife had told them that I was beating on her on the way to the skating rink. So I got charged with family violence, got charged with terroristic threats, and went to jail. My mom had to come get me out of jail. And man, I was really beat down then. But you can't keep a good man down. You can keep him a godly warrior down either. I mean, once you get a part of God, and once you live that spiritual life, there's really nothing that you can't overcome, and there's nothing that really shakes you to the point where you're knocked to your knees. But my mom got me out of jail, like within hours. And while I was in jail, my wife took my kids and just disappeared. I had no clue where she went. No clue whatsoever.
Had she ever accused you of something like this before?
No, never.
So where did that come from? That seems like out of nowhere.
Yeah, it does. I've never been able to piece it together. Never been able to figure it out. But anyways, when I came out of jail, her and the kids were gone. And that's when I decided it was time for me to do a overhaul on my entire life.
Hmm.
So I moved back in with my mom and dad, even though I was a grown man. I didn't have any kids because my wife took the kids with her wherever she went. And I started going to church again, but this time I was bouncing from church to church to church, because I really didn't feel comfortable in my own skin to be that age and going to church by myself without my wife and family.
Mm-hmm.
So out of fear and out of embarrassment, I would bounce from church to church so nobody would realize that, I was by myself.
Mm-hmm.
I was insecure for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the Marine Corps, thought I was a badass. Did 5 years in the Marine Corps, 2 tours of combat. But, I still wasn't secure in myself. But anyways, here's where God revealed himself to me, because not only did I go to church, but Pentecostal churches, they believe in prophesying. And I would go to these Pentecostal churches, and the pastors wouldn't know me from Adam. And the minute that I went to one of their worship services, Lord and behold, out of nowhere, they would take me out of the entire crowd, the entire church, and they would prophesy over me. And every single time it had to do with my wife and my children.
Hmm.
And the prophecy was like spooky, because it was like dead spot on as to what I went through in my past and what I'm going through at the time. And so that, God was revealing himself to me through all these pastors and ministers prophesying over me. And then I would call into Christian radio stations like The Fish, and I would, tell them, hey, pray for me, and I wouldn't give them specifics. I wouldn't tell them what they were supposed to be praying for me over. And people, pastors, and church leadership on these radio stations would be calling me and prophesying over me, and it would be right to the point of what I'd been through and what I was going through with, my marital status and my situation with kids. And so I was like, wow, this is spooky, but it's pretty cool at the same time,
Yeah. Yeah.
So my wife, God had told me, you're not ready yet. You're not ready to for your wife to show herself to you again. But during that separation, because she knew that my daughter had accused me of molestation, I told her that, if I ever found her, that I was going to fight for custody of my kids. So I found her, and I did exactly as I promised. I fought for custody of my kids.
Mm-hmm.
So when I did that, in order for her for me not to gain custody of them, she accused me of the same thing my daughter accused me of. Because she, things in your life, right, wrong, or indifferent, will follow you for the rest of your life. That's why it's so crucial. And I try to tell my children that even at the tender age of 14 and 15, you've got to be smart about the decisions you make in life, because everything in life follows you.
Mm-hmm.
So she made that same allegation against me, that I was molesting my children. Was investigated by the police. Once the investigation was over, they were happy that it was an allegation, because she wanted custody of the kids. So nothing happened. The case got dropped. My kids, though, they had to go through a forensic interview, which I really didn't want them to ever have to go through. A forensic interview with children, they remember that. That's something that'll always be etched in their mind. Mm-hmm. And that's something that they're going to have, that's bondage that they're going to have to release out of their life later on in life when they understand how to do that with God's help. They're going to have to understand how to break that bondage and break that generational curse. But then, so then we ended up getting back together, and our marriage was great. I overcame the fact that, you know, God told me, you got to forgive her because I forgave you. And that's the mother of your children. And my plan is to see families thrive, not separate and divorce. But while I was going through all this, God said, I want you to change. I want you to change your life so you can be a stronger Christian man for your wife, and you can be more of a loving husband for her. And so until you change yourself, I'm not going to bring her back to you. So I was going through counseling with professional counselors, anger management classes with professional anger management places. I was going through, you know, all kinds of personal counseling and therapy and everything to change my life. Because even though I was a Christian, living a godly life, I wasn't living it the right way. So God showed me that. And so I did everything he asked of me. He revealed himself through all the prophecies that I was given. And so I forgave my wife for accusing me of that. We got back together, and we're still together to this day, happily married with a great life. But then once again, tragedy happens. And this is where I put my foot down and said, now is the time. Now is when I'm going to become a Christian motivational speaker. Because we get back together, life's going great. For years, it was going great. Then my kids were going to school, and my daughter, my 14-year-old daughter that I have now, she was in 5th grade at the time. And for a solid year, these four girls were bullying her, to the point where I had to make a meeting with the superintendent of the school board, and they just wasn't willing to do anything. They wouldn't do anything to handle the situation or to rectify it and make it go away. But one of the girls that had been bullying her all stinking year went to the school counselor a week before school was to let out for the summer and said, Leah, who's my daughter's name, Leah told me that her and her youngest sister take showers with their father, and he forces them to perform oral sex on him. So here it goes. I'm back into another bad situation, and this time DFACS comes in. They take my kids away from me and my wife, all 3 of them, put them in foster care. And it took us 2 years of nonstop fighting to get our kids back and get them back home. I was never arrested for anything, but even I took liedetector tests with the police, 3 of them. They made me go through. I forget what they're called now. I had to go through these tests that they give actual offenders that are molesters. And these tests are real invasive, and they're humiliating, and it's horrible. But I had to go through 3 of those, and even though I passed all 3 of those, had the board certified specialist say this guy is in no way, shape, or form a pedophile. Took 3 lie detector tests from the police department, passed all 3. they still wouldn't give me my kids back because they were still convinced, because I had this alleged on me 2 other times, that I was guilty.
Mhm.
So for 2 years, they were tapping my phones. The police were tapping my phones. They were tapping all my social media. They were having people follow me around. Literally, they had undercover detectives that were literally following me around for months upon months, for a year. And I could have let that destroy me. I could have allowed that to put me into such a deep depression that, most people probably would have committed suicide over something like that. Being accused of something so serious, and knowing that, there's a lot of people in prison that have been accused of that are actually doing prison time now, that are actually innocent.
Mhm.
I mean, you hear it all the time. There's a lot of innocent guys in prison that are in there because of accusations of that very thing. But I go back to the fact that, once again, you can't let anything put you in such a position that your mindset and your perspective change to the point where you lose understanding that God's not going to give his worst battles to his weakest warriors. He gives his strongest battles to his strongest warriors, because he knows that they'll turn to him, and they'll allow their situation to glorify him, and that he's going to bring them out of it. Because not only is he, when you go through a valley like that, not only is he in the valley with you, but he's every step of the way, he's directing your steps. And every step of the way, he's walking it with you. You may not realize it, you may not feel it, but he's there, and he's going to bring you out of that valley. But here's the ticket. You've got to be able to understand what he's trying to get you to learn in that valley before he's going to take you out of that valley. Because everything that happens to somebody in life, no matter how petty or no matter how serious, it happened to them for a reason. It happened because God wants to either take them to another level and promote them, or he wants them to learn something so he can take them to another level. But the way that I've dealt with all this adversity in my life, and all these storms and trials and tribulations, was to know and understand my worth in Christ, and to understand that there's a lesson, there's a meaning, there's a purpose for everything that I go through. And that 2 years of fighting for my kids, I went to the Georgia Supreme Court, and I faced 12 of the state's highest judges, and I fought an appeal with no attorney, because there's no way you're going to be able to afford an attorney to take an appeal to the Georgia Supreme Court unless you're filthy rich. I mean, it's just way too expensive. So I had to learn during this trial tribulation, knowing that I was being watched by law enforcement every single day of my life, knowing that my kids were suffering in foster care. I had to learn law so I could fight my way out of it. Then I had to be my wife's backbone, because that's the mother of my daughters. I mean, she spit them out. She's the one that went through childbirth, and for her kids to be ripped away from her, she was never in the Marine Corps, so she don't have the taught traits that I was taught. The Marine Corps, I'll honestly say, I think the Marine Corps saved my life in a lot of ways, because it gave me the ability to be hardcore. It gave me the ability to be an overcomer.
Mhm.
Gave me the ability to adapt. Gave me the discipline I needed, it taught me how to be motivated and how to motivate myself. And it gave me a lot of valuable teachings that a lot of people that has never experienced the military don't ever receive.
Mm.
Because the military, God, honestly, man, it really does teach you how to, have a warrior mindset, and how to have a mentality and a perspective that, you're a warrior, you're a champion. And if you let hard times beat you, then you're weak. There's no place for you.
One of the things the message that's coming through to me, beside the grit in the fight, the no quit, is the sense of taking responsibility for everything around you, not blame. I'm not saying that you were accused of these things and you accept the blame. That's not what I mean. What I mean is looking around and saying, why do these similar kinds of things keep getting, why are my, what's attracting this stuff to me? You're like a magnet for this stuff. And taking responsibility for something that you're doing or something in your world that's making you vulnerable to these things happen. And then the message, as you say, from your God, from what you see as your higher power, as there's a lesson to be learned. I need to elevate my game. There's something that has to happen to change me, to stop being a magnet for this constant storm. Does that ring true at all for you?
It does. And, it was a hard struggle and a hard battle, man, because just like you say, why is it that I've been accused of the same damn thing over and over and over? And, that's one of the reasons why the Department of Family and Children's Services and law enforcement, that's why they believe that, they really did have a true pedophile on their hands. And they were determined to get whatever evidence they felt like they needed in order to make a conviction, in order to make an arrest. But I'm a firm believer that there's just some things in life that you'll never know the true answer to. You just got to have faith in God and understand that there's a reason for it. We may not know the reason now, but one day, somehow, some way, we're gonna understand the reason for the storm, whether it's when we pass on and go to glory, or whether we figure it out and find out here on earth.
It's interesting. I had an experience. I think partly for me, I had an experience not like yours, but in the same direction, where I had a contractor working on my home. My kids were small then. And he ripped me off. He ripped the house apart, and then right before a major holiday wanted to get prepaid. And I was a novice on hiring contractors and all that, and I didn't realize he was ripping me off. So when I finally started to catch on to it, I was ready to report him to the state because he was operating without a license and doing lots of bad things. And he called the Department of Social Services on me and accused me of beating my children in the driveway, that he witnessed me. But he had the ages and the genders wrong. He was like, he didn't even know my kids.
Yeah.
But I realized then that is like very common. And I had another experience where nobody was called, but it was a acquaintance who was going through a divorce, and his ex-wife accused him of having guns in the house and like all this stuff that was like completely false. I'm like, where did that even come from? Just of dangerous surroundings. And I think, I don't know, maybe lawyers get people to do that because of, I don't know, but it's more common than people realize.
I've always said it, that it's very dangerous to judge someone. And that's why a lot of people don't want to even tell their life story, because they're afraid of getting judged.
Yeah.
They're afraid of losing friends, business associates, whatever the case, but they really live in fear of being judged by other people, and just all kinds of other reasons why they don't want to share their life story. But you're absolutely correct. Until you walk into someone's shoes and you've experienced something, then it's hard. I understand that it's hard for somebody to believe without walking in those shoes. But you got to be careful when you judge somebody, because you're absolutely right. In the judicial system, especially in divorces where there's a custody battle, thousands and millions of people will lie in order to gain custody of the children. I mean, a custody battle has got to be one of the worst, cutthroat, mischievous, devilish, demon-written deals that you could ever go through. Because I lied about my wife during the I didn't get divorced from my wife. Now we just separated. But during that custody battle, during the separation, and with the 15-year custody battle of my other children with my drug addict ex-wife, I mean, I lied, man, and I'll be the first one to admit it. I had no integrity at that point, because if I could get the judge and the court to believe that they were bipolar, or they were schizophrenic, and they were bad news, and whatever lies I could dream up, if I thought that I could get somebody and convince somebody that I was actually telling the truth, I would do it. And but the bad thing about it is if they go too far, then it becomes not only unethically wrong, but then it becomes really bad, because you put somebody else in jeopardy of going to jail or prison as an innocent person.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that 2 years was a battle, man, because I still had to work. I still had to financially support me and my wife and kids. I still had to pay, now on top of paying the normal bills, I was paying legal fees.
Mm.
Then, all the stuff that they put me through, the polygraph test, the gross, you're a sex freak test, all the therapists I had to go see, psychiatrists I had to go see, all that was mandated. But not only did they mandate it, but they made me pay for it. Mm-hmm. So, not only did I have to be able to wake up every day and be strong and go to work, be successful at work, put all that personal garbage away for 8 hours while I was at work, so it wouldn't affect my job performance. But I had to take care of my wife. My wife, man, she was, for 2 years, man, she was a basket case. Sure. I mean, she couldn't, I'd wake up at 3:00 in the morning because I was woke up to her literally just screaming and crying her eyes out on the floor, on her hands and knees, begging God to kill her, begging God to let her die, begging God, please let me get in an automobile accident today and let me not survive it. God, please, being away from my kids like this is just too much for me, and I just want to die. But I'm not strong enough and brave enough to commit suicide. So, not only did I have to be strong for myself, work every day of my life, but I had to be my wife's strength. I had to bring her through the hell. But we made it through. We got our kids back. A lot of people tell me, why don't you sue the state? Because they did a lot of things that were illegal and a lot of things that were wrong. Mm-hmm. But the way I look at it is, even though I don't like what they did, and even though I'm mad about it, I got to get my mind right. I got to get my perspective right. I got to get my thought process right. I got to get my mindset right. And I got to align myself with God and my values of what I got going with God. And even though they did some illegal stuff that I could probably sue them over and win a lawsuit and get some crazy money, but I also got to look at the other side of the coin. And that other side of the coin is exactly what me and you talked about. I've got to be responsible for a lot of that happening. Even though I wasn't the one that made all the past allegations, I still got to understand their thought process, that they're trying to protect 3 children from somebody that's had this accused, over and over and over on him. And so I got to put my feet in their shoes and walk in their shoes and forgive them like God forgives us.
Right.
Live in grace.
Yeah, it seems for sure the times that you've been living in grace, you've had a much better life. But that point of the difference between taking responsibility and taking blame, I can't stress enough to say, it's what am I doing to attract this to me? And it could just be not being confident, just knowing that you're an easy target, that you would be easily triggered, that you don't have the from things that may have happened in the past, that you've been knocked down so many times that you're just showing signs of weakness. And that's, what bullies like. That's, they're easy targets. So times when I've needed to elevate my game, I raise my frequency, raise my who I am, and raise my confidence, I guess, in life of the strength of who I am. Really getting back to what we talked about earlier, going back to who you've always been.
Right. Well, then you also have to understand what I said previously is that once somebody finds out that you've been accused of something,
Mm-hmm.
or that you've been arrested for something in your past, that's dangerous right there, because people will feed off that.
Mm-hmm.
They'll utilize that to their advantage. So once again, what happens to you in life follows you for the rest of your life.
Right.
There's no getting around that. Yeah. There's no, you can bury the past in your own mind. Like, pastors will tell you, the past is the devil's playground. Leave it alone, bury it, and don't look back.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same token, you got to always remember that even if you do all the right things, you forgive yourself, you forgive the other people involved, you act in grace and with the right perspective, you got to always remember that, unfortunately, whatever happened to you, whether it was something that was your decision or something that happened to you that was completely out of your control, it's going to follow you for life. Mm-hmm. We just can't get out of that. Nobody can.
Right.
So it's all in the perspective you put on it. And I don't live in fear. It can, and that same allegation could happen to me 10 years from now, but I'm just, I can't have that mindset. I can't have that fear, and I can't have that, that perspective, because if I do, it'll destroy me.
So does it help you then to tell your story this way, to have me sit here with you and hear your story? Does that help you in any way?
Well, I'm hoping that it helps other people instead of helping me.
Okay.
Like when I was over in Iraq, I left a lot of stuff out when I was in combat, because I was actually in an IED explosion that nearly took my life, knocked my teeth out. That's why I've got dentures, which I'm not wearing right now because they're uncomfortable, and I don't speak well when I have my dentures in. But there's a lot more to my past that I didn't present on this call, because it would have just got too lengthy and too long.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, I was in an IED explosion, almost lost my life. God saved me. it wasn't fun, that's for sure. Busted all my teeth up, broke my jaw, busted my ribs, punctured my lungs, broke my leg, just all kinds of stuff in that IED explosion, and some other stuff that happened to me in the Marines and in the Marine Corps as well that I didn't get to tell. But as far as getting my story out there, if I was actually speaking on a speaking engagement, it wouldn't go the way me and you did it today. It'd be a lot more animated, and I would piece it together a lot better than I pieced it together here. But my hopes of telling my story in any fashion, form, or way would be to help somebody else. Because when you go through divorce and when you go through allegations that could put you literally in prison for the rest of your God-given life, and when you go through all these different adversities and trials, tribulations, and storms, I can't tell somebody how to have the warrior mindset like I do. I can't teach that, because to me, that's something that people have to figure out how to learn on their own and instill in their own selves. So I'm not one that I could be a teacher to do that, to teach people to do that. But I just pray each and every time I give my story that somebody else that's going through tragedy, going through pits of hell, a storm, that they'll hear my story and say, well, damn, if that guy can, go through what he went through and make it and survive and thrive and be happy and be successful, then I can too. Mm-hmm. And that's what I believe everybody's got a life story and a testimony. And I would hope that they would use it to glorify God and to help other people. That's why I told you that, being a Christian motivational speaker, I'm willing to do it for free, because I'm not doing it for gain. Mm-hmm. I'm doing it to help other people and to glorify God in the process. Mm-hmm. Because, I give all the glory to God each and every day of my life, because without him, there's no way I would have made it through the stuff I made it through. As I'm doing a real speaking engagement with the additional animation and the type of speaking that a speaker does, it really affects the viewer a lot better when you can give it on a stage with all the animation and with all the speaking qualities that they're not going to get from mine and your talk today.
Well, you never know, because I do think hearing a conversation can be more powerful than you realize. Just hearing the story and hearing what's behind it for you, that your goal is to just illuminate the strength of the human spirit and looking for your higher power, looking for, for help, being willing to tell your story, being willing to ask for help when you need it. So my hope is that they will hear the story and be motivated, and, maybe even want you to come out to speak for an organization to motivate and provide some inspiration or perspective for somebody who's having trouble. So you never know, if you touch one person in the crowd, you've done your job.
Right. But not only do I want people to hear my story, to glorify God and to know that there's hope and to know that there's ways to go from the valley to the top of the mountain, but I also want them to understand, even if they're not a spiritual person, and even though even let's just say they're an atheist that don't believe, that's fine too, because my story, I think, can still give even that kind of person hope that they can face adversity, trials, tribulations, and get out from under it. But one other thing that I want to caution everybody on is there's a reason for every single thing that happens in your life. And you really got to have the mindset and the perspective to stop and ask yourself, life, what are you trying to teach me? If you're not a godly person, or you're an atheist, or you're a Jew, or you're, whatever, I respect anybody in everybody's culture. I respect their spiritual needs. I respect, whatever they want to believe in. But I want them to analyze themselves, because it always happens for a reason. So, they need to ask themselves, what is life teaching me, trying to teach me? Mm-hmm. Do I need to make some kind of changes within myself in order to overcome this adversity and get back on track? Because there's been several times in my life where God has told me, like I said earlier, I had to go to counseling. I had to go to therapist. I had to go to psychologist. I had to go to anger management, because there was reasons why that I wasn't able to see at the time. I was blind. But like when my wife left me and took off with the kids, although I was devastated, and although I was a Christian man, and although, I was leading intercessory prayer and leading the youth ministry, I still wasn't walking in the right way as far as how I was treating my wife. And I wasn't aware that I was the bad guy. And I had to take responsibility. And God showed me, until you take responsibility and until you change, I'm not bringing your wife back. I'm not putting this marriage back together. So, I just want everybody to understand that, everything can be beat. There's no hell or valley that you can possibly be put in and not overcome, to include, a death of your kids, or a death of your spouse, or a death of your parents, or, even going as bad to say, if a woman was raped, that's still something that she can overcome. That's still something that she can take the proper steps to deal with, and overcome that valley of her life, and become a stronger, better woman for it. But I just want everybody to understand that nothing just happens because it happens. There's a reason for it and a purpose for it. And I just, not only do I want to glorify God and help other people with my testimony, but I want them to understand that there's a big realm of responsibility, and there's, they got to take a photo of their own selves and really dig deep and find out what is life teaching them, trying to teach them, and why did this happen? You're not always going to find out why it happened. I mean, it might be until you die before you find out, what the purpose of a certain storm was. But or you might get lucky, and like I said, and find, figure it out. Mm-hmm. But I figured out quite a few of my storms. But then there's, being accused 3 times as an innocent man of such a horrendous, horrible crime. I still haven't figured out, why that has happened. Mm-hmm. Well, my daughter, I can figure that out, because she didn't want to come live with me, and she knew that would get her away from not living with me. My wife accusing me of it was because she wanted custody of the children. And the third one actually happened because my daughters would tell people their life story, and they didn't realize that you got to be careful on who you tell your life story to at a certain part of your life, because it could come back to haunt you, and it did.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, we've been going for quite a while, so it might be a good place to wrap up. I really appreciate your detail and your openness and vulnerability in sharing your story, because it takes a lot of courage to do what you're doing, and it's great to have this gift that you have to speak. You're a wonderful speaker and a powerful speaker. So I can imagine you on the stage really taking over. And I know you have a sense of humor too. We didn't get much into joking today, but I know you can use the humor as well. So I appreciate the lessons you taught me today. Life is a lesson, and it really fits in so well in my show with Rock Bottom Syndicate to help people understand that when they take responsibility, they can make changes in their lives to make things better and to grow as a person. So it's been wonderful for me to hear your story, and I thank you so much for sharing it.
And once again, I'd like to just thank you. It was a wonderful honor to be blessed with you allowing me to come on to your Rock Bottom podcast. I mean, I really took that deep down into my heart, and just as thankful as I am, I hope you understand just how proud I am and how thankful I am to be given this opportunity.
Well, I feel the same way. It's reciprocal, because to have a person bare their soul and share their personal life experience is not an easy thing. And all in the interest of helping other people. So we're a team when it comes to that. And it's really nice to be on your team.
Yes, ma'am. I feel the same about you.
Well, thank you. Well, thanks so much, Jack.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. Take care.
All right. All right. Bye-bye.